everyone, this is Miss Moriarty and I'm here to discuss with us our instructional video on natural selection. Make sure as we watch the video we are taking down notes using our evolution notes and marking the assignment as done. Now, what is natural selection? Well, it's when individuals have either a physical or behavioral trait that's going to make them better suited for their environment, and so they will be more likely to survive as well as reproduce than, say, other organisms that do not possess that trait. So that's where we discuss the phenomenon known as survival of the fittest, right? And remember, fitness in the case of evolution doesn't always mean the biggest, the fastest, and the strongest. It means it's the organism best adapted for their environment. Now, you can see here in the graphs to the right, natural selection can act upon a range of phenotypes within a population, not just singular individuals. And we can actually see in each of these graphs, these are three different types of how natural selection acts upon the phenotypes of a population. And remember, phenotype, back from our genetics unit, that means the organism's physical trait. So we can see up at the top here, right, we have these clamshells here. In the red line, that's our population here. So that's the original population of phenotypes. But when natural selection acts upon these range of phenotypes, it's actually the two extreme colored shells here that are the better fit individuals, and the intermediate is not. In the second one, we see with our geckos here, their tail length, they have all different tail lengths, and once again, we see the red line is the original population there. But in this case, when natural selection acts upon this set of phenotypes, it is the most medium or intermediate tail length that's going to be the best fit, while the shortest and the longest are not. They are selected against. And then lastly, here's our giraffe example here. Here's the red line. That's going to be our original population there. Blue is what's going to be where we see natural selection acting upon that. And you can see that natural selection is going to choose one extreme. So this graph here, this is known as directional selection, choosing one of the extremes out of the phenotypes being the best fit. The middle graph, this is stabilizing selection. This is going to choose the most intermediate phenotype. And the above one here, this is disruptive selection. In this one, we see both of the extremes are being selected for, and the intermediate is selected against. Now, what is evolution? Well, it's going to be a change in a population's genes and frequencies over time. This is what can create new phenotypes. But how do those things change over time? Well, we can see the frequency at which a specific allele appears in the population is known as the allelic frequency. So how many alleles do we find in this gene pool? There's about 30. How many of those alleles are red? There's about 5. And what would be the allelic frequency then of our red allele? It would be 1 out of 6. And collectively, all the alleles that we find in this population, we call it the gene pool. So this is all the alleles found in that population, all the possible genetic combinations that we might find in that population. That's what's going to change over time. Now, if we take that same gene pool, right, what would happen if any of those individuals that had that red allele did not survive, right? The allele would then not be a part of the population, the allele would not be passed down, and eventually that population would change. And we can see over time it's going to be only those darker colored alleles that are the ones that are surviving and reproducing. And so in the end, we can see that that population is going to be then more of those darker alleles versus the red and the dark alleles. What can cause those genetic changes are mutations, right? We can see things that, like radiation, chemicals, can all cause mutations, which we know are changes in our DNA. When we see those then genetic changes, how does then the species itself change over time? Well, we see reproductive isolation amongst those organisms. This is when the population cannot breed due to some sort of separation, or simply just gradualism. We can see over time in our example, specifically in our gene pool example, over time, right, our red allele began to disappear from the population and only the darker alleles remained. That would be gradualism, gradual change over time. Another key vocab word that we need to understand is adaptation and how this plays a role in natural selection. Well, an adaptation is going to be that inherited characteristic that's going to increase that organism's chance for survival. And it could be physical, or it could actually be a behavior, a sound of some sorts, anything that's going to benefit them in their survival. Adaptations will become more common in a species, and the more it is, the more adapted that species may be. We can see some examples of adaptations can be physical, like the organism's speed, maybe their camouflage, which we talked a little about in our peppered moth examples, claws, quills. Could be behavioral, maybe they remain solitary, they feed in packs or herds. But remember, individuals do not get to pick and choose their adaptations. These are simply qualities that are already present among some of the individuals in the population, typically by their genetics. And as those adaptations become more common, the species continues to adapt. Another example of a very interesting adaptation some species have inherited is known as mimicry. This is when one species is actually able to resemble another. Usually, that species is harmless and it's resembling a very harmful species. We can also see camouflage, right? We kind of saw this in our peppered moth example. This is when organisms try to resemble their surroundings. They use it as a defense mechanism. Lots of fish, crabs, bugs, snakes, frogs, anything really you can think of, some birds. Obviously, our peppered moths all use camouflage in some way. And remember, it's not even just prey that can use camouflage. Also, predators have used camouflage in order to then capture their prey. Right, so here's just some examples. Can you find the animals in these two pictures? Right, there's one, there's two. Right, so guys, in other words, kind of putting it all together, we know natural selection, if we were to define it, is when certain variations in a population, right? Remember, we need genetic variation. Those variations survive, they reproduce, and they pass on their variations to the next generation. And it takes many generations to develop over time. All right, guys, that's it for our video. Please make sure as you watched, you took notes, and please mark this assignment as done.